So it's now April, the sun is out, the birds are singing, and we can really get into seed sowing now. Now, before I get into the variety and the types of seeds that I'm growing now in April, it's really important you're aware of your last frost date. So there's an interactive map you can Google and you can work out based on where you live in the UK what your last average frost date is. Mine is about the middle of April. So all of these seeds I am sowing indoors and sort of at least germinating indoors before I bring them outside. Now let's get on with the fun bit, and that is sowing seeds. Now the first variety that I am going to talk about is my absolute favorite vegetable to grow, to eat, to everything, and that is pumpkins. Now last year at the allotment, I grew 5 pumpkin plants. They were all a variety called Burgess Buttercup, and I had over 32 pumpkins harvested. I had to give them away to friends, I had to cook them in different varieties, soups. I made some muffins with pumpkin puree. I did loads and loads with them, and it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it, and it was an absolute delight over the sort of autumn and winter. They kept for ages. So I want to repeat that again. Now, I got 2 varieties here. One is Squash Queensland Blue, which is very similar to sort of your Crown Prince and your big sort of winter squashes, great for roasting and things. And the other one is Pumpkin Jack Be Little, which is also a nice little edible pumpkin, but a bit smaller, a smaller plant. And I'm thinking I might try and get it to climb this year, so I grow the pumpkin vertically. But more on that in a separate video. Let's get into sowing pumpkins. So I'm going to start off by showing you how I sort of sow pumpkins. Now the key with pumpkins is they're quite a big seed. There's lots of energy in the seed and they explode out when you sow them. So I'm using these sort of, well, they maybe 3-inch pots, just because that way you don't have to pot them on as quick. You could start off with smaller, but you have to move them on quicker. Whereas this, they've got maybe a couple of weeks where they can grow in. Now, once you've filled up your pots, and I would just fill them up with multi-purpose compost. Pumpkins are really hungry feeders, so as much nutrients as you can give them. You can then just make a small hole and pop your pumpkins in. I've decided to go for 4 plants here, and I've got quite a number of seeds, but I'm basically going to do just one per pot. Now, if I have any problems where they don't germinate or something, I'm not too worried because I know I've got plenty of time to re-sow. The other thing to mention is when you plant them, don't plant them so they're lying flat. Plant them so they're sort of pointing up. The reason for that is that when you water them, water is not going to sit on top of the seed and potentially rot it out, which is a potential problem with any seed. It is sort of rotting due to too much water. But that's really all there is to it. Now, the absolute pro tip for growing pumpkins on is obviously, keep an eye on the roots and in the holes, and if they look like they're becoming a bit too root bound, it's time to pot them on. You don't really want to stunt the growth of a pumpkin plant. Now, the next absolute pro tip, and I'll put a link to a video I made last year on sowing pumpkins, but the absolute pro tip is to plant them out when they're quite big, maybe 2 or 3 true leaves. The reason for that is a small pumpkin plant is prey to slugs, and you don't necessarily, especially depending on how many you're sowing, you might not have spares and things. You don't want to lose too many of your pumpkin plants. Now the next seed, unlike pumpkins where I have quite a lot of experience, this is one that I haven't ever grown before, ever, and that is cucumbers. Now I've got one here called Market Moor, which is a slicing variety of cucumber, and then I've got another French variety, which is a more of a sort of pickling gherkin variety. They are both sort of branded, marketed as being good for sowing outdoors in a English summer. So I'm going to give it a go, and basically say you can sow them indoors in April, get them growing, plant them out once the risk of frost is gone, and hopefully these will be all right. But let's get into sowing. Now, sowing cucumbers is very similar to how you sow pumpkins, very same principle. So I thought I'd just take this opportunity to quickly talk about my compost that I use here. So I use a sort of multi-purpose compost, and I'll show you exactly what brand I'm using. And then I add a little bit of vermiculite to it just to make sure that there's a bit more sort of drainage in the in the compost so that you don't waterlog your seedlings. Now, these here cucumber seeds are much smaller, so I'm actually going to try and do 2 per pot, and that's just a bit of redundancy in case one of the seeds doesn't germinate and I don't waste all this compost or don't waste all this space basically. So I'm just going to, again, exactly like pumpkins, I'm not putting them in flat, I'm putting them in on their end, pushing them down a bit, and then covering them over. And what I'll make sure I do with this compost is that I give it a good water before I bring them indoors to then hopefully germinate. Now, the absolute final seed that I'm really excited to be growing in May is beans. Now, in particular, these are climbing French beans, and they're the sort of ballotti beans. The reason I'm really excited to sow these, and the reason I'm sowing them now in April, not waiting until May, is because I want dry beans. So what you can do is you can grow beans and pick the pods, eat the pods, or eat them when they're sort of green and young. But what I want here is I want dry beans for winter storage that you can use in stews, casseroles, and all those nice things. And because of that, I need quite a long growing season. So they grow, mature, they then dry on the vine, and that's when I harvest them. So I'm going to sow these now in April and see how we get on. Sowing beans is really straightforward. They are absolute beauties to look at, and that's one of the reasons I want to grow them for dry beans. But all I'm really doing is using these sort of HR10 module trays, sowing them about maybe an inch deep or sort of thing, about the sort of same length as the seed is deep. And then, yeah, covering over, watering it. And as with all these seeds, it's a case of germinating them indoors, because all of the seeds in today's video need that sort of 18 to 25 degree temperature in order to germinate. And that's it, guys. What I'm really excited to be sowing in April, there is obviously lots of things you can sow in April: spinach, beetroot, radish, lettuce, etc. But now in April, as things are getting warmer and the light levels are getting better, pumpkins, cucumbers, and French beans are the other things that you could be growing. But don't worry if you haven't got time in April, you can do these in May as well. It's not the end of the world. But yeah, no, brilliant. And if you've got any sort of seeds that you're sowing in April, any recommendations, do leave them in the comments. And thanks for watching.